Hey, everybody. My name is Geoff Roberts. I'm the head of growth at Qualified, and we have a very special guest here this week. His name is Colt Steele. Hey, Colt, how you doing?
Hey, everyone. I'm pretty good. I'm doing well enough. I hope everyone else is surviving. If you're stuck inside like me, everyone's feeling okay. A little bit of an odd time.
It certainly is. So we'll touch on that briefly. Obviously, want to talk about how everyone's dealing with COVID-19, but the topic of the day is assessing developers. We're here to talk to Colt today because he's built a curriculum to train developers for companies like General Assembly and Udacity, Udemy, more recently Springboard. So we're going to pick his brain a bit. This is an opportunity for all of you that are in attendance today to ask what questions you have about training or educating developers. So I'll kick things off with some questions for Colt, but if you have questions you'd like us to ask, please jump into the chat and just fire off your questions there, and we'll circle back to those shortly. So without further ado, first just want to check in on you, Colt. When I first touched base with you a couple of weeks ago, you had mentioned you'd come into contact with somebody that had COVID-19 and sort of had to go into self-isolation yourself. How are you doing? How's your health? How are you holding up?
Yeah, so that was a bit unexpected. Fortunately, I usually just work from home anyway, recording videos, and I'm sort of locked away in a dark room with padded walls where I just talk to my microphone normally. So it wasn't too much of a change from my normal routine, but it's definitely been odd, and I'm doing okay. I was telling you that I feel like the beginnings of potentially being sick right now, and so that has me on edge. It's hopefully just a cold or something. I'm fine right now. I wouldn't be doing this if I felt miserable, but definitely it's a little bit odd. But yeah, that was a couple weeks ago, and then when I can't remember exactly when the Bay Area went on lockdown or on sheltering in place. So now everybody's kind of doing it. I mean, I assume I don't know what I think it's California wide now.
It is. Yep.
Yeah. So bizarre, definitely. And I was fortunate I had stocked up a little bit just for like general emergency preparation, not for the virus. So I had some supplies and food, and yeah, it's going okay. It's definitely bizarre. And I think I'm fortunate to work from home already, but seeing some of my other friends and people around me trying to adapt or just losing their job, it's very, I don't know. I think things are up in the air for a lot of people.
For sure.
And I don't know. Yeah, I've heard from some of my students who have been laid off. I've heard from some of my friends, and so I feel fortunate enough that things are okay for me. I don't live in the city anymore. I moved out kind of into the middle of nowhere. I'm like an hour away at this point, so it's not the middle of nowhere, but it's definitely a lot more quiet. And I can, go for a walk or something and not see someone. But hopefully, yeah, I think I'm fine. So far, nothing that I'm super worried about for myself, but I am obviously worried for a lot of my grandparents and parents. And that's
of course.
But I don't mean to be too doom and gloom. I guess it's kind of hard right now. Things are kind of doom and gloomy. And at least if you read the news, or I usually wake up every morning and I turn on this, just like the NPR app. In the past couple of weeks, it's like I skip every story, next, and it's somehow everything has to do with the virus. Like even the music podcasts it's just everywhere. And to think just a couple of weeks ago, I was more stressed about politics, and I just didn't want to hear about politics anymore. Now,
how quickly things can change.
Yes.
Well, we're happy to hear. Well, not happy to hear you're not feeling so hot. Hopefully, it's nothing more than a cold.
I think so. I mean, I haven't left the house in 2 weeks or more, so like yeah, I've been taking it pretty seriously because I live kind of with no neighbors right now, so it's easy for me to stay at home. So I mean, it's possible that I have it, but it's also possible, it's completely in my brain, or that it's just a cold or something. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the topic at hand, let's talk about COVID-19 and some of the positive things both yourself and Qualified and Code Wars are doing. So I'll start. Just want to let everyone in attendance know the team at Qualified. If you're unfamiliar with our company, we make tools to help assess developers, train developers, that kind of thing. And we have a sister company named Code Wars as well, which is a community where you can train and basically take coding challenges for free. But we've made both Qualified and Code Wars 100% free for any K through 12 institution that runs a coding classroom. So if you're on this call and you're a teacher and you've typically taught your students in person but are transitioning to remote learning, feel free to reach out to us, team@qualified.io, and we'll offer up our platform to you for free. But Colt, you're doing something similar to kind of help people take advantage of all this time they have to themselves. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So I don't know how, what kind of overlap there will be with your audience here, but I launched a course on YouTube on Monday that I'm just releasing one day at a time, one lecture at a time, basically a how to learn how to code from scratch course targeted to complete beginners. So we're starting, we just finished up HTML right now today. And then we'll do CSS and JavaScript and go from there into Node, Python, potentially. Depending on how long this all goes on for, I'm sort of just hunkered down, putting out a video a day with some homework and trying to build a little bit of a community there on YouTube where, it's free and somewhat of a community where people are just talking and kind of in the comments submitting their homework so yeah, that's what I've been doing. Originally, what I planned on doing was just making my Udemy courses free, which is something I'm still talking to them about. But the way Udemy works, without going into too much detail, they changed their coupon system. So you can't just make an unlimited free coupon anymore. You can make a course free for one day, a month, and that's it. So in April, I'm probably going to do that. I've already gone through my March free coupon day. So instead of that, I thought I'll just put a new, more up-to-date course out on YouTube, and it's slower because I'm making all the content as we go, but it's also something for me to do. Yeah, so it's out right now. There's 4 videos as of today. The 5th one will be out tomorrow. I'm not doing weekends, but Monday through Friday there'll be new videos.
Very cool. Awesome. We just shared a link with all webinar attendees too, so they can check out your YouTube channel and see the videos that you've put out so far. That aside, getting into the topic of the day, where I'd love to start is just kind of understanding a bit about your career path. So you went to NYU, you got a computer science degree. Did you always have aims of getting into education, or how did you end up sort of taking the path that you've taken? Yeah,
well, first of all, I did go to NYU. I studied computer science. I actually did not graduate.
Okay.
So for a while, I tried to just ignore that part. I would never say that I graduated or that I got a degree, but I would kind of say I studied computer science and I hope nobody would ask. I did 3 years there. But at this point, I feel like I'm comfortable enough telling the full story. So I went to NYU and was not planning on doing computer science. I was there for music. I was there for acting. I was there because I wanted to do Broadway stuff. That's why I sort of went to NYU. It was not for the school. It was for New York and being in the city.
Sure.
And I had done a lot of coding in high school, and with my dad as a kid, I was really fortunate that he sort of pushed me in that direction, but it was not something I was thinking as a career. But at NYU, I took this one really cool course I liked a lot called Creative Coding. It was all sort of about art installations and building. A lot of those projects you see when you walk into a tech company's office, and there's some crazy wall of LED lights or lava lamps that are somehow lighting up in sync, or different installations like that where they're powered by code. So that was sort of when I started to think more about maybe there is an overlap between what I was at school to study. I was trying to do music production. I was working in a recording studio and touring with a band, and that was kind of the whole trajectory I had in mind. And then my world kind of changed. There was a bit of a my best friend died, and it was this long, drawn out, horrible thing in the hospital. And I missed.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so yeah, it was not great, and it caused me to reevaluate a lot of things. Mainly, I just missed so much school that semester that I couldn't go back. So I was forced to take some time off, and I started to do more coding and take it more seriously, and just see if I could, make money while I wasn't in school, or just learn more. Go back to I took computer science in high school. Actually, we had a Java class, which I'm really thankful for, because that gave me a leg up for sure when I got to college. So during that period, I was kind of spiraling around, like with no direction, no real end goal as to what I was going to do. So that's when I just dove in headfirst. And at that point, there were a lot more resources online to learn. And that was 10 years ago or something, 8 years ago. And since then, I mean, now there's a million other resources. And when I was in high school or when I was in middle school, I was like going to a library or going to Barnes and Noble trying to find books on coding. There's like, Java for Dummies. And I would buy those books and take them home and spend a couple days trying to get through them and then inevitably give up. But in terms of education, my goal as a middle schooler was to be a science teacher. But my parents were, they gently pushed me in a different direction or encouraged me in a different direction, which I can't blame them for. Just the way that, educators are paid in this country, and especially back then in middle school and high school teachers, I mean, it's still not good right now. And it's rough. The teachers that I had were living like an hour away from school, commuting. So my parents kind of tried to get me to do something else, and I did music, which is about one of the other professions where you have fewer benefits and lower salaries. But from there, as I was kind of spinning in circles, not sure what I was doing with my life, and I was doing a lot of coding, I started doing more tutoring and just helping friends, because a lot of people knew that I was decent at programming, even though I wasn't doing it in a professional capacity. And
Sure.
And then I started to do some like freelance web development work, that sort of thing. And a couple of years later, I moved to San Francisco, and at that point was pretty competent at the development side. But and I thought I was going to go work for like a big tech company, and I got a couple of offers and did that for a little while, and then realized there was this whole industry around teaching, and teaching web development, where you could be a teacher, which I really enjoyed and I always wanted to do, but you could also, afford to live near where you teach, and you could have health benefits and all that stuff. And so that was a long, slow process. It was never the plan to go, teach this stuff. And even since I started, it's kind of been an evolution of, I'll try teaching online for, like, let's see if I could make enough money to, pay a month of rent, or maybe take a vacation or something over the summer. That was the original plan when I started teaching online, was let me just do this on the side, and maybe someone will notice it. And then it took off, and then all of a sudden I had to decide, am I going to focus on online stuff or in person? And it's kind of just been like a blind stumbling through the woods journey every part of the way. It was not deliberate. So, I always had friends who were set on being a doctor from day one, and they had this like direct, straight path, and they knew exactly what they were doing. That was never me at all. And even to this day, I sit here thinking, what am I going to do if this goes away, or if something happens? Am I going to go back to music? Am I going to try doing something else completely different? As much as I love doing this, I still feel like I've kind of just fallen into it. Maybe I'm good at it, but it's not it was never the end goal. So I'm super fortunate it's worked out that way, but
Sure.
It was not teaching was a passion, but teaching coding was like the last thing I was thinking.
So being self-educated to yourself, and going back however long ago it was, as you said, there weren't the same number of resources out there. There weren't the types of courses that you've since developed. How did you teach yourself to code, and what was sort of effective for you? Like what really stuck from your own experience?
Well, so there's like two different parts of it. The first is I learned the basics of coding and loops and variables and functions and sort of writing classes and all of that. As a kid, my dad got this like $80 robotics kit, Parallax. Okay. I think the company was called Parallax. It was a Visual Basic little chip that you would, or a microcontroller that it came in this kit, and you would plug it into your computer and upload, sort of like an early Arduino, if you've ever heard of those or worked with them. So it came with a book, and that taught me all the basics, and I spent a lot of time like making little tiny robots that would chase my cats around or sweep the floor or something like that. And then I took an AP Java class in high school, which was a little bit more advanced. So I knew how to code from those resources, but I knew nothing around web development, or I wanted to make video games. I wanted to do like music software. I knew nothing practical. I guess making little robots to chase your cats might be practical, but not. It wasn't really career programming. So,
sure.
And I tried to get books. Like I bought a book on video game development from Barnes & Noble, and it was like 800 pages. And I followed it for like weeks, and I just felt at one point I hit a wall and I couldn't get unstuck. And at that, I think I was 15 or 16 or something. So at college, I took a couple classes. I actually went back to school after I took this time off. Eventually, I went back, and there were a lot more computer science classes. There were more sort of web development-ish classes. They weren't the same as going to like a boot camp, or they weren't teaching the same stuff that people are teaching today. But there was JavaScript and all these. So that's where I really started to learn the basics. And then honestly, I used things like Codecademy. I was actually in the very first Udacity cohort or class when they first launched, which was kind of cool for me to go and work there eventually and work on their newer content. So there was some early programming stuff, learn to code resources online at that point, but it was still a little bit hit or miss. So it was a long process. And I actually I thought I was going to go to a boot camp in San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco after kind of falling. I didn't fail out of school, but I almost, I failed mentally out. I was kind of burnt out and going through a bunch of stuff with my friend, and I decided I'm living in the most expensive city in the US, and I don't think it's worth it for me to just like aimlessly go from one class to the next and chase different hobbies and passions. So I got a pretty cruddy job in San Francisco. The first thing that I could find that was like remotely coding related. And I thought I was going to go to a boot camp to improve my skills. And I attended a little part-time thing at night, a course on web development. And they ended up hiring me to teach the next one before the course was like maybe a quarter of the way through or something. So that was a bit of a confidence boost. I realized, okay, I actually know most of the stuff I need to know.
Sure.
Here I thought like, I knew how to code. I could make all sorts of apps. I could write up, I could do these art installations and do cool physical projects with code, but I thought I could never, do anything beyond little freelance web development work. And then this opportunity came around, and I took it, and I thought I would do it once or twice and save up some money. And then I just really enjoyed the teaching. So from there, it became just going to conferences, going to more advanced trainings, and it's still, it never stops. Whatever the next framework is that I'm trying to teach, a year or two out from that, I'll be trying to learn that framework and build some projects, do some freelance work with some companies to try and make sure that I'm up to date on everything. Because even if I was some super senior developer who spent 20 years in the field and then stopped to teach full time, things are going to change after you start working full time. So it's always this process of how much time do you devote to learning whatever the newest, greatest thing is before you teach it. And for me, that's probably the most important part, is making sure I would never want to try and teach something that I don't feel like, I'm 100% competent in, which you would be surprised. It's actually, there's some instructors and who are, a lot of them are in the same boat as me. A lot of instructors who did not plan to get into teaching, like some of my fellow Udemy competitors, who I keep in touch with. And we have a little group where everyone's talking about, like, you know, what are you learning now? Let's build a project together. Let's sort of mimic the experience of building a project in a company with this, because we're not working at companies anymore. And
Sure.
so we have our own little study group. But back in the day, I also, you know, I was pretty early on Code Wars, and a couple other platforms that have since gone on to, you know, I think at the time, I don't know what the original plan was for Code Wars, but the way I remember it, I mean, it's nothing like what it is today. Sure. Some big changes in this space online.
Absolutely. And having all of that as context now, if you're talking to, whether it's, you know, a high school student that is interested in computer science, or even a friend, somebody older that wants to transition to a career in computer science or coding, software engineering, how do you think about the difference between a traditional computer science degree and taking a coding bootcamp, for example? What's kind of the value of each in your eyes?
I mean, for one thing, regardless of what you actually learn in a computer science program, and there's a lot of important stuff that is taught there, but probably the most important part of it is just the rigor and just the intensity of most of the programs, where you really are pushed. And some of the computer science classes I was taking at NYU, I was always a good student in pretty much every subject, but I had a hard time. I mean, I had to work hard and, like, really study.
Sure.
And spend forever on some of these. I had this one assignment where we were supposed to write our own simple operating system. And I spent weeks on it, and I was going to every office hours and like really, really going for it. And it was still hard. And I panicked. Like, that was one of the few times where I had courses where I was just stressed every time we had homework, because it was hard.
Sure.
And that's, I guess, that can be a scary thing, but that's also, I think, one of the signs. Like, if somebody makes it through that, and you can stay through that degree of difficulty and rigor, and most of the computer science programs today are probably just as challenging, if not more difficult, because there's more demand, and a lot of them have, you know, curves, and you have to have some grade average before you can even get into that program. Like the one at Berkeley, I have some friends who are there now. You have to, I can't remember what the average is, but you have to have some high GPA as your freshman year before you can even apply to be a computer science sort of major. And they're cutting people, and it's competitive and stressful. So I do think if somebody makes it through a program like that, it is just a good sign that they can work hard, they can learn difficult things, and they can just get through the stuff that is, it's challenging. With that said, I do have a lot of friends who've gone through computer science programs who leave asking me, like, how do I learn how to make a website? Or how do I like build my portfolio? Which is, I mean, they're different disciplines, which I understand, and there's not really like a web development major, or I know there's game development at some universities these days, but it's pretty niche. And at best, maybe there's a class or two on more practical skills at most computer science programs. And maybe I'm hoping in the future that gap will sort of change, or at least shrink a bit, because it is kind of weird that a lot of people will leave a computer science program still feeling inadequate in terms of like job readiness. Now they probably won't have a problem getting hired, but they don't have the skills. Like, they're not learning as much JavaScript or whatever, Python, or whatever the actual languages are that jobs are looking for. Now, I can only speak from my experience talking to a couple of my friends and people from high school who are going through computer science programs. In terms of a boot camp, it's the opposite problem, where it's like 90-something% grounded in what companies are looking for and the technologies and the relevant skills. And then we have to do as much as we can to add in the rigor and the more conceptual, or like more computer sciencey topics, to try and account for the stuff that you would learn in a computer science program, which is, it's impossible to condense 4 years down of that content into a couple weeks in person. So we do our best. We talk about all the topics that are, I guess there's really two things we try and do. We incorporate the technical stuff around data structures and algorithms and some of the, the CS 101 stuff, the topics that are most likely to come up in interviews, the topics that might actually have a place in web development. If you're building a social network, you need to understand some graph theory, you need to understand certain data structures and traversal and things like that, where we try and teach that when it's grounded in sort of practical day-to-day, not day-to-day, but it's relevant, right? It's not just teaching something so you can get an interview or get through an interview. But then the second part is trying to introduce the rigorousness or the rigor of a computer science program, where there's a technical content, but then there's just the difficulty and the kind of the test of somebody's, determination or interest. Because you do get a lot of people who apply or online, like a lot of people who, it sounds great to be a web developer or to be an engineer, and they've gone through some HTML and CSS content, and it's relatively easy, and you feel confident. And the last thing we want to do is like cut somebody down and tell them like, no, it's way harder, you don't know what you're doing. But we also want to make sure people are legitimately interested and have the capacity to spend the time and work hard like you would as a developer. And that's a little bit tricky to test for in boot camps early on. It's hard to screen for the people who actually care about this and are interested more beyond the fact that like they could get a high-paying job, which obviously is a big reason a lot of people are interested in it. But if that's the only motivation and the only connection you have to coding, it's a little bit difficult to stay motivated through even just a 6-month program or 9-month or whatever I've worked at boot camps ranging from 3 months to 9 months. So there's quite the span of how much content we go into, how much computer science we incorporate. But I'd say it breaks down into those two things. There's some technical stuff that for your basic web developer job, you still need to know that a computer science course teaches. But then the second thing that if I was hiring, the thing that for sure from people who finish a computer science program is that they can do hard stuff. They can just make it through like some of the misery, which maybe it's not misery to them, but for me, some of that stuff is just brutal. And it is fascinating, a lot of it, but there were so many assignments where I just sat there thinking, this is the least practical thing I've ever had to do. And I'm like panicking and stressed, and it's 4 a.m. And I'm probably better off for doing it. I definitely am. But at the time, it was hard.
Sure. So right now with your latest project, you are sort of helping to bridge this gap with job preparedness via a new boot camp that you're building in conjunction with a company called Springboard. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Springboard specifically and this new boot camp that you're working on?
Yeah. So I taught in person at boot camps for a while. I eventually founded a boot camp with some of the favorite instructors that I'd worked with in the past at Galvanize and General Assembly and Hack Reactor, that sort of stuff. And we had been just focusing on in-person stuff. And then I had my whole online setup that was a separate sort of, entry-level courses for people, stuff that people were getting jobs with, but definitely the majority of people were taking because it was a cheap course and they were interested in just learning the basics, right? There was no admissions. There was no, the people are paying like $5 or $10 or something. So I tried to offer TAs, but we can't do code reviews. We can't do like one-on-one calls. We can't do any of the mock interviews, the stuff that you would get in a real boot camp. So for years, I would always think, like, I wish there was a way to do something online that was as close to in-person as possible. Like the content is one thing that's the easiest part to bring online. Although even that, you would be surprised, trying to bring like what we teach in a real boot camp in person online can make for a horrible experience sometimes. Because half of what we teach is, here is like the first 20% of a topic, and then we push you to go learn the rest on your own and then turn something in and we're gonna grade it. And if that's something you're getting online, it's kind of a horrible experience. Unless you are super motivated, we end up with a lot of people who just stop and don't come back. At least when it's a Udemy course or YouTube or something, you can't really have that same level of rigor unless you have the right student who has that kind of attitude. But I mean, even myself, if I'm taking an online course, sometimes I'm just like, come on, like, just tell me the answer. I just want to get this done. Like, you know, you have my attention for now, but I could go watch Netflix, or I can go for, you know, a bike ride or something.
Sure.
So I totally get that. But we wanted to have something that was more, or I wanted to have something for a long time that was rigorous, that was admissions tested, where we could offer a job guarantee. We could have students meet with mentors. We could have code reviews and portfolio reviews, mock interviews. And I thought about putting that together myself for years, and it's just kind of daunting. The number of people you have to hire, the number of, I mean, the funding it requires, you know, just to get the tools in place to even facilitate mock interviews and meetings and scheduling and all this stuff. I realized, like, I'm never going to be able to do this on my own. So around that same time, Springboard reached out to me, and they do the same thing. They do exactly that, but they had been doing it for data science. So we talked for a while about what it would look like, and long story short, it's basically what I had been hoping to do, a real online boot camp where, I mean, originally it was going to be just like a 3-month program, and then I was kind of pushing hard to do something more rigorous and longer. And so we teach like exactly the curriculum that we use in person at our school, which is called Rhythm School in San Francisco, which, you know, right now is based, that's been an interesting part I didn't even talk about, but we had to shut the whole thing down, or at least we're in the middle of a cohort in person, and we had to move online, and we didn't have any of the tools ready or anything. So that's been another crazy part of this experience with the virus. But anyway, so it's the exact same curriculum. I mean, I recorded 1,200 something videos. So that part was not, that didn't exist. But it's something that is far more broad and deep than any of the curriculum I've done online. So it's yeah, over 1,000 or 1,200 videos. We do Python, we do JavaScript, so 2 languages, plus we do like Flask and React and Redux and a whole bunch of computer science. The last sort of 2 months are computer science topics, and a lot of the stuff I was talking about. But the whole way through, we have check-ins where like you are truly being tested on things and assessed, and we have a dashboard where we're tracking like how are people doing, and who are the people we need to intervene with, and who is not working hard enough, or who, you know, do we need to adjust the schedule for this person, or do we need to send in somebody to talk with them and sort of figure out where their weaknesses are. And so there's a lot of that we do in person, which is online now, and I could never do it on my own, which is why I'm working with Springboard. And so far it's been, I mean, for me, it's been miserable making the content, to be honest, because it's so much. I mean, I think a lot of people have this idea. I'm super fortunate to work from home and record, and I'm not trying to complain, but people have this idea of like, you know, you could do this from anywhere, and you can be traveling and living the like nomad life. And
Sure.
I'm very fortunate, but most days I get up, I go into a room where all the windows have been mattressed over and there's blankets hanging from the ceiling, and I talk to a microphone until my voice gives out. And then I take a break and have tea, and then I do it again until my voice starts getting all cracky again, and do that until 3 in the morning. And then I edit more. And it's just, this Springboard course has been the biggest undertaking like I've ever done. I think the biggest course I've ever done online so far is 200 videos, and this one is 1,200. So it's been a lot. But with that said, so far it's been great. We have our first, it started in January, and we're at, what is that, 4 months now? So even the earliest students who started out still have a couple more months. But you know, I don't want to sound too like I'm pitching it here, but it does have a job guarantee, and it has you know, a lot of mock interviews and job support. And for me, I think if I was starting out, it's exactly what I would be looking for personally, and what I wish existed. It's easy for me to say that now, and especially when I'm like involved with it, which I totally understand. But especially just having the money back guarantee. If you don't get a job, you don't pay. You don't have to pay up front. There's a lot of stuff that I'm excited about. And I guess the last salesman-y thing that I'll say is that so far in our surveys, I can't remember the metric that we used, but we were looking for an 80% score sort of satisfaction with the course, and right now we're sitting at 98. So people are really happy with it. Yeah, so it's going well. But anyway, sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm here to just pitch that. I mean, it's one aspect of teaching online, and it's for one type of student who
Sure.
Is really ready to commit. And I mean, we test people. For us, like, it doesn't make sense to admit. I worked at some boot camps. I won't name names, but some boot camps where the model was basically get anybody in the door.
Sure.
And that is, even online, some of the competitors, that is still common. Of like, let's just get seats filled and charge money. And it makes sense in the short term for a lot of those companies. But your reputation obviously suffers. So what we decided to do is just be a lot more strict and rigorous. And unfortunately, it pains me when we turn people away, but we now have a prep course. We have opportunities where people can sort of come back and spend a month learning the basics they need to know. But yeah, it is a lot more rigorous than most of the stuff online.
Awesome. I got 2 more questions for you. Then I want to just make sure we're cognizant of time and open it up to everybody in attendance. So if you do have questions for Colt, now would be a great time to throw them out via chat. But final 2 questions from me, at least. This bootcamp with Springboard sounds awesome. In any bootcamp format, there's only so much that you can teach students in 9 months or 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is. What does the before and after look like for a student that goes through this boot camp? Meaning, if they start out with relatively small amount of computer science skills or programming skills, and they come out the other end of this boot camp, how prepared are they? What have they learned? What can they confidently walk into an interview and say that they bring?
Well, I think for any boot camp, whether it's one that I'm involved in or a competitor in person online, the biggest thing is you want students to leave, yes, prepared to interview and get a job, which in some ways is a completely different skill from being a developer once you've landed that job. And a lot of places will focus on just getting people in the door, and let's just cram in a lot of computer science, and let's get this student to the point where they can memorize most of the stuff that might come up in an interview and hope that they can learn everything else on the job. And that is one of the hurdles. Like we have to teach that stuff, right? We have to teach interviewing. But really, the main goal is to get somebody to the point where they can learn anything they need to afterwards. And we test for that. We test to see, one of my favorite parts in person and with Springboard is, and I do this in some of my Udemy courses too, it's just a little harder because of what I mentioned. It can be a turnoff to students who aren't super motivated, which I understand, but we will throw something new at students and say, all right, we just did Python, we just did JavaScript. Now here is some C code that we need you to write this in C, or we need you to implement, we want you to work with this API with the camera and face tracking, or whatever it is, something you've never done, we're not going to teach you. And you need to turn this in, and we're going to assess how it goes. And it's kind of mimicking that experience that, it's day-to-day for me, or most developers. Like, you've got to read the documentation, learn some tool, and actually demonstrate, you not just follow a tutorial and see what somebody else does and copy their code, but actually learn something, which is really our end goal, is getting somebody to the point where they can pick up a new skill. And if they're working in React, great, that's what we teach, but they're also probably going to be working in Vue or Angular or something else, and they'll need to figure that out too.
Yeah, it's funny, as a marketer that's built curriculum for other marketers, I used to get questions all the time on, how do you do X, Y, Z in HubSpot? And students kind of expect that more experienced people have the exact answer of how you're supposed to do that and how you work with a given tool. And the answer more often than not is go read the documentation, go read their knowledge base, you know, figure it out on your own.
Well, and that's a surprisingly hard thing to teach.
Yeah.
Because you do have skepticism from some people, but even ignoring that, if everybody accepts that, okay, I have to learn how to learn this stuff on my own, it's still difficult to actually teach that and get somebody to, because it's really more confidence. And yes, there is a skill set, right? You need to know how to find stuff. You need to know what to prioritize, where to look for information. But then a lot of it is just, once you have enough skills under your belt, it's easier, which is why, so that's why we do, like, we teach JavaScript and Python, which a lot of boot camps just don't bother doing 2 languages. But the goal is, we're going to hit you with this 1 language. Now you're going to learn everything again in second. I mean, you don't learn every single thing again, but you're going to learn the basics and the syntax. And all of a sudden, what used to be this one sort of line of knowledge in your head is now a tree where there's different sort of similar branches. You can see, all right, here's how you do functions in both. Here's how object-oriented programming differs between the two. Here's how it's similar. And that makes it easier to go learn C or Java or some other language and draw those connections too. And that's kind of the goal. We want students to have a broader, more just confident skill set rather than being pigeonholed into exactly the stuff that we taught them and only the skills that they learned at a boot camp. But yeah, it takes time to learn that. And then the last thing I would say in terms of what the before and after looks like, a lot of our students, in person at least, are actually founders and wanting to launch their own company and not interview. So one of the big goals is making sure students leave with the ability to, you know, learn their own stuff and figure out what stack should I use and what database should I be using if I'm launching this new app. Like, we don't teach iOS, but we have students who leave and make iOS apps. And I have a husband and wife, actually. They're a really cool couple. They're in their 50s in Berkeley, who just launched their app, completely self-made. The 2 of them made it together. They came to Rhythm and learned web development, and they left. And like 2 or 3 months later, not using a single tool that we taught, but made their own app. And it's on the App Store, and that's their business these days. So that's another end goal, is like not just getting somebody into a job, but giving somebody the skills that, yeah, they might not use React and Redux and Express or Python exactly, but they should be able to go and learn whatever they need, whether it's Firebase or Vue or, you know, some other framework. That's hopefully the goal.
Absolutely. Final question for me. You've obviously had this huge range of teaching experiences, and this question probably could have filled our entire hour here. But in your own mind, what are sort of the 1 or 2 hallmarks of teaching coding effectively? Like, what are the fundamentals that you've learned over time that you would passionately advocate for?
I think one of the things that gets overlooked a lot, I guess it depends if we're talking about web development or just programming, like just learning a language. But one of the things that gets skipped over a lot when people are teaching web development or iOS, whatever it is, some larger topic, is just giving students a bit of context and scope of what they're learning and how things actually work. Like, I've seen a lot of courses, they start with JavaScript from day 1, and they don't stop to explain like what a browser is and requests and how a web page loads and where JavaScript comes from and how it actually runs in your browser. They don't stop, or with iOS, like they don't really stop to explain like how an app works and the fact that most of these iOS apps are still, you know, have a server somewhere else that they're getting data from, and that they're making requests. And like, I think it's important to take a higher level overview of things. So that would be one thing I've seen a lot of people ignore. But then in terms of just a language, I think the biggest, most important thing in teaching anything around coding, and really anything in general, is giving students the opportunity to actually practice and do something. There's so many courses, even some of my competitors on Udemy, and even some of my early stuff that I look at in person. I look at my old curriculum to see, you know, sometimes for inspiration, to see if there's some exercise or some explanation that I've forgotten about. Well, a lot of the times I'll look at my notes and I realize I didn't have any like quizzes or activities or exercises. I didn't have any opportunities for students to practice. Because when you start out teaching, at least for me, nobody really tells you how to teach. They don't tell you, like, you need to break up your lecture and give students opportunities to do things. So that would be the biggest thing, really, is, in my opinion, teaching something well means, yes, lecturing or teaching or talking about something and explaining it, hopefully, in a clear way. But also, so much of the work is done when somebody is working on their own and practicing and trying to connect what they just heard you say to their own brain. And a lot of courses just ignore that.
How do you reinforce that learning and let students sort of realize it on their own?
Yeah, and it's hard online. I mean, in person, you can just look at people's faces and see, you can read the room and point at somebody
Sure.
and say, all right, what do you think, Jacob? Like, explain to me, what does this part of the diagram mean? And then if Jacob can't do it, then you call somebody else and you can have them collaborate and explain to the rest of the class, or you can have one of them be the lecturer for 5 minutes, or you assign them, go build this thing and you're going to present it back in an hour. Online, that's harder, but I try. It's a struggle, but we try.
For sure. All right, I want to jump into some questions from the audience, and I want to keep this to an hour max, so we've got 15 minutes or so. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So Shankar says, after Python basics, what should I learn? Any suggestions?
Yeah, it depends on what your end goal is. If you're getting into Python for web development or data science, but if you're learning the basics of the language, I would say if you're going into web development, I would pick up something like Flask, see how to connect Python to a database, understand requests and how you make a request from Python, learn the basics of HTML and CSS so you can start making websites and apps that are powered with Python. Or if you're going into data science, I would pick up a data science course and learn more about things like NumPy and pandas and some of the basics there. You could even do game development. There's a lot of things you could do, but I would pick something where you go from learning the language basics to building things, whatever the things are. Even if it's the world's simplest website or web application, it's a lot more satisfying to actually have something you've made that isn't just a command line script. At least that's my experience teaching it. If you've learned the basics of Python, there's nothing stopping you. You don't need to be siloed into Python. I teach Python and JavaScript together for that very reason. So if you are enjoying Python and you want to go down that road, I would stay there. But if you're thinking maybe you want to get into front-end web development, don't worry about the time you've sunk, because it's not wasted. That is a great way of learning to code, is to pick a language and then a couple of months later pick another language. So you could go to JavaScript, you could go to something else.
Okay.
So don't feel stuck in Python.
Got it. We have a demand from the audience to see your cat. Jennifer says it's disappointing his cats haven't made an appearance.
Okay.
Are they nearby, or?
Well, when we first hopped on this call, when it was just me and you saw one of my cats would not get off my lap, and of course now I'll get one of them is around.
Video call distractions are the new normal in the wake of COVID-19. So hopefully,
she's not gonna be very happy.
Here we go. And who's this?
This is Blue. Say hi, Blue. She's probably gonna walk on my keyboard. Come on, say hi.
Awesome. All right, another question. This one is from Anastasia. She says, what would you say are the top mistakes made by people learning to code?
The number one, in my opinion, is the constant shifting of what you should be learning and listening too much, or trying to stay on top of the latest trend or the number one technology. Like if you just take JavaScript frameworks, I have seen a lot of students who will learn Angular and then halfway through they read something or they hear somebody say React is actually more used in today's market. So they switch to React. And then I guarantee, if you're learning React, then you're going to hear about Vue, or these days things like Svelte, whatever the new up and coming framework is. People, and that's just one example with frameworks, but it's so easy to get paralyzed and not actually learn one thing completely, especially in such a fractured, there's just so many options. And I feel that when I'm teaching something, especially on Udemy, I spend months making a course, and I sit there thinking, I see these articles and these podcasts talking about this other, like Svelte. Should I just make a Svelte course now instead? Should I just stop? But the difference is, when you're learning, once you learn one of those tools well enough, you'll be able to learn the others and realize that they kind of all have the same goal. And that's just one example. But I'd say that paralysis, the stopping, the starting, the listening too much to what's trendy and what's not, and what's going in and out of style, it's exhausting. Sure. I mean, it drives me crazy, and I'm confident in learning any of them whenever necessary. But if you're starting out, that seems like a life or death decision. Like, where do you start? What do you do next? All that matters is that you learn enough stuff where eventually you can learn the rest. It doesn't matter exactly what order. Yes, it's nice to follow a curriculum and a game plan and have it laid out. But the biggest mistake in my experience is seeing people just flip-flop between things and end up just stressed and feel like they're getting nowhere. So just pick something and stick with it. Now, if you wanted a quick recommendation, I would just say start with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. If you're interested in front end at that point, pick up React because it's an easy first framework to learn. And then if you really wanted to, you can go to Angular or Vue. But if you did that in the complete opposite order and you actually stuck with it, you would be completely fine.
Awesome. All right, next question we've got from Prithvi. He says, hey, Colt and Geoff, is it possible to be a programmer in a field like applied mathematics or other more sciencey and technical careers? Because I like both mathematics and programming, but I'm not sure how to go about it.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about applied mathematics. I will say one of my favorite co-instructors is this guy named Matt, who is I can't remember what area of math he has a PhD in, but he has a math PhD. He's written books on math. He's written textbooks. That was his first career. And he got into coding through math. And now I don't know, I couldn't even begin to explain to you what he did and what he does, except now he teaches, and he's always just incorporating high-level math whenever possible to drive our students crazy. But in general, I think if we step away exactly from applied mathematics, but just talked about like academia or just broader disciplines and sciences or math sort of areas of study, I have a lot of friends who pick up programming, whether it's for biology and they're doing Python to help them analyze genomes or something, who knows, or like with all this stuff with the virus, there's so much code involved these days in simulating
Sure.
and trying to figure out the protein structures and how things are folded. And there's a lot of applications for it. I wish I could tell you anything about math. I can't, but I'm almost positive that there's some way for the two to intersect. Now, if that's a career, that might be something you're paving on your own. That might be a hobby. I have no idea. But I mean, the fact that, I can take music and code and put them together and write code to make songs or generate scores or something. You could take relatively disparate topics and inject code into them. You take something like math, there's bound to be lots of applications there. But I'm also talking completely out of my element and am basically completely BSing you if I told you that I knew anything about what you're studying. So I wouldn't listen to me, but I'm sure that there's a way to get them to intersect.
Sounds good. Gerald says, beautiful cat. And then he wants to know, he says, I know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Is that enough for me to get a job?
I'd say it depends on that third piece, the JavaScript, and how much you know of JavaScript. And I would say, if you're able to build something larger, if you're able to, like, if you know a framework like React or Vue or Angular, I'm not saying you have to know them to get a job, but it helps generally, because with those apps, you'll be building larger front-end pieces of an application. And basically, yes, I think it is possible, but you would need to be able to demonstrate something that you've built, because you could just know JavaScript to the point where you could be writing rock, paper, scissors or something. And that, I would say that's definitely not enough. That JavaScript portion is the biggest piece. So if you're able to build, I'm trying to think of an example here, but if you were able to clone the front end of a website like Trello, I don't know if you know Trello, but it's like a drag and drop interface for moving different cards and to-dos around. If you could try and clone something like that, and you're able to do that with JavaScript, then 100%. Now that's hard, and I would have a hard time with that too. So if you do attempt that, don't feel bad if you get stuck. I mean, that would require unending Googling from me. Drag and drop is miserable in my experience. But yeah, I'd say with those 3 skills, it's possible, 100%. That's what most front-end jobs are looking for. It's just hard to know how much JavaScript you actually know and how much you can do with it. Oh, I can't hear you anymore. Is that my computer or you?
I think at a macro level, one of the challenges that's going on in the tech world right now is there has been this huge growth in coding boot camps, and there's been a market that's flooded with junior software engineers when in a lot of instances, companies really need more mid or senior level talent. When you look at that challenge in the industry at large, how do we solve for that? How do we take these students that have entered the market as junior engineers and continue to upskill them and get them to the point where they're a bit more career ready?
Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. Having worked at boot camps on both sort of ends of that spectrum, I won't name names, but I've worked at one boot camp where it was just, let's churn out people. There's a million entry-level jobs. And this was years ago when there were lots of junior developer jobs, and almost everyone got hired anyway. But I've also worked at much more rigorous boot camps where we are making sure that nobody leaves the doors of the boot camp or nobody graduates without truly meeting the bar that we've set. We're not just, we have no qualms about asking people to reapply or come back next time, or give them a refund if they're not going to meet that standard. But really the biggest difference between, if you think about being able to get a job, get a junior level job, what that person looks like when they accept that job on day one versus 2 or 3 years later, or even a year later as an intermediate developer who is no longer, like a complete beginner, who has experience on the job working on projects. What is the real difference between those two? Like maybe you get a small raise, maybe you have a different title, maybe you're just, instead of junior, you are, junior level 2 or engineer, whatever that term is. What has really changed in you or in your skill set in a year or in 2 years or 3 years? Maybe you've learned new technologies, maybe you've grown your skill set, but most likely it's the practice and the actual work you've been doing on a practical code base, something massive, something where there's other developers working with you. You have, the workflow down of how do you make a small change to a code base with 1 million lines in it? How do you work with a production database and not completely screw it all up? That knowledge is the more valuable stuff. It's not like you're leaving, or that after a year of work, suddenly you're going to leave knowing every possible technology that you would ever need to know. You might not have learned a single new framework or a single new language. You're probably better at JavaScript or better at React, but it's really the work that goes into the day-to-day work as the life as a developer, the workflow, the confidence, the navigating a big code base. So one of the things that I don't know if I can talk about this or not, but one of the things that we're working on right now is basically getting a real code base from a real company. And it's complicated. We'd have to have students sign a bunch of NDAs and a whole bunch of stuff. But basically, after they graduate, and this is just one example, but with Springboard, after they would graduate, we would offer students an additional opportunity of basically working with a mentor still, but making changes
on that code base.
A large code base where things would be, you would have like, stories and stand up and sort of a mock, it wouldn't even be a mock experience. It would be a real experience where you were working on a production app and having your code reviewed. So it would be kind of like an internship online, but we think that is really the biggest gap, is that skill set, which is impossible to teach to one person online at a time. You have to have a big code base. You have to have other developers. You have to have the tools in place. You have to have, a database with millions of rows in it in order for people to understand how to optimize their SQL queries. All this stuff that just comes with working on the job somewhere. So that's one of the things we're most excited about, but it's hard. It's also hard to do online. So yeah,
for sure.
That's probably the biggest difference, I would say. It's like, you're not going to know a million other things as an intermediate developer versus a junior. Technically, like, you're not going to suddenly know every language out there, but you're going to have these skills that are just hard to learn on your own.
Awesome. Well, Colt, we've worn out your voice already. I'm sure you have additional videos you have to go make, but thank you so much for your time and insights. We really, really appreciate it. And please stay healthy over the coming weeks.
Will do. So I wanted to say, if anybody had other questions, you don't have to subscribe to my YouTube channel, but I'll be doing sort of a similar question and answer session in the next week or two on my YouTube channel. So if you do have questions, you can hop over there and I'll post about it and you can ask those questions there. But hope everyone's doing well. Stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, and stay sane.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.